So something that's a real concern of mine and that I'd really like, I suppose, to get off my chest by kind of structuring it in the form of a video is my thoughts on social media storms and the kind of dogpiling of individuals that often occurs as a result perhaps of something that they've said that is offensive, or at the least something that a group of people deem as being offensive. So what I want to do is I want to sort of start this off by giving a few examples of the kind of thing I mean, then making a few comments as a result of that. But whilst I give you those examples, I'm minded of certain things that I think are features of these social media storms, features that are quite interesting things to consider. So let me tell you what those things are, and I hope that you'll consider them while you think through the examples that I'm giving. The first is that these social media storms seem to be inherently unpredictable. It's a little bit like driving way beyond the speed limit down the same road every day, and then once in every blue moon you get a speeding ticket. It seems to be a little bit like that. There's no way we can say, well, if you do this, this is going to be the result. Seems to be a total kind of unpredictability to the whole thing. The level of response that defines these social media storms seems to be one that is grossly disproportionate, that perhaps something has been said which was offensive, but that the level of response and the depth of the response takes place is way out of scale with the original offence. The next is that these things are harmful, not just harmful in a sense that when you get a torrent of abuse it's really rather unpleasant and it can leave you feeling really rather stressed and worried, but it can actually have actual tangible impacts on people's lives. And the final and perhaps most interesting of all is that many of these things, whilst they involve a victim, they often don't involve any obvious offenders. Now, what I also need to point out is that this is something that is of concern for us all, or ought to be of concern for us all. I'm not talking about here that something that just involves the kind of Anita Sarkeesian types who are more than capable of both weaponizing and monetizing whatever flat comes their way, or of the kind of infamous social justice special snowflake type that seems to manage to find something offensive in just about anything that you could possibly do. This is something that is of concern for all of us, because it's, if you've got any level of online presence at all, it is something that could potentially impact upon you, and in fact impacts upon people even that don't have any online presence. I know if we're going to find any solutions to these kind of things, then it will probably involve some kind of bipartisan approach. So let me give you a few examples of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Perhaps first we should consider the case of the scientist Matt Taylor. Remember the scientist Matt Taylor? He was the guy that led the team that landed a probe on a comet. Landed a probe on a comet. Now, I come from a part of England that's quite well renowned for kind of understating things and being a little bit grudging with praise, but even I've got to say that was not a bad effort. But Matt Taylor came in for quite a bit of abuse online for wearing the wrong shirt on a television interview. It was a shirt that was decorated with those kind of pin-ups that was acceptable in the sexually repressed 1950s, but isn't regarded as acceptable things to wear nowadays. And part of the reasoning behind that was deemed it was because of the situation that you have a field, the field of science, in which women are underrepresented. And if only Matt had worn the kind of starchy, traditional, conservative attire that white, middle-aged, middle-class scientists traditionally wear, that would be much more appealing, much more welcoming to women wanting to come into fields of science. So what happened as a result of that is that he got an absolute torrent of abuse online. So much abuse, to such an extent that it started to overshadow, in many social media circles, it started to overshadow the actual landing of the probe on the comet itself, which led to a second circuit of abuse for Matt Taylor for daring to wear a shirt that had led to the overshadowing of the landing of the probe on the comet. So bad did this get that Matt had to make another press conference in which he apologised, and so upset and so stressed was Matt by all of this that he was actually in tears while giving his apology. Perhaps a much more insightful example would be that of Adria Richards, who works professionally as a developer evangelist, but was also an amateur moaning bastard. And cheers from one amateur moaning bastard to another, Adria. In 2013, she attended PyCon, which is a convention on the Python programming language. That sounds an absolute ripper, that one, doesn't it? We missed out on that one there. Certainly not the kind of thing where you might need a couple of jokes just to lighten the atmosphere as the afternoon winds on. She happened to be sitting at one of the talks in front of a couple of tech guys who made a couple of comments that she deemed inappropriate. They made a comment involving a big, to each other, not to her, a comment involving the words big dongle, which they admitted was a little bit of sexual innuendo, and also a comment about forking the repo, which doesn't involve fucking the guy that's come to repossess your car. What it actually involves, forking, means copying or taking somebody's data, and a repo is a repository, so it is copying and taking somebody's data, effectively, was what they were referring to. Now, Adria Richards, she'd overheard what was being said behind her, and Adria Richards, she's very sensitive for this kind of thing because she thinks that this is the kind of thing that dissuades women from getting involved in tech fields. This kind of smutty innuendo that takes place in male-dominated workplaces and female-dominated workplaces and mixed workplaces and seemingly every workplace that exists. But when it happens in tech workplaces, this is the kind of thing that dissuades women from getting involved. So she wanted to make a bit of an example of this. So she turned around, smiled at the gentleman, took a picture of them, didn't inform them why she was taking a picture, then published that on her well-subscribed to Twitter account, along with the comments which you can see here. And before long, an entire shitstorm had started on Twitter and on many different types of social media. The end result of that is that the company Playhaven decided to sack one of the guys because they felt it was bringing the name of their company into disrepute. But it didn't end there. As a result of them sacking this chap, a lot of people took exception to Adria Richards. In fact, a denial of service attack was carried out by somebody on Adria Richards' employer's website, and as a result of all of this, Adria Richards was fired as well. 2 people lost their jobs over that particular comment. Now, I hope those 2 examples go some way towards furnishing what I mean by it being harmful and it being disproportionate, the response being disproportionate to the offence that was committed in the first place, if offence was indeed committed in the first place. But what about unpredictable? Well, we have a very, very recent example of that if you're watching this soon after the video was made, which is this case of Jaclyn Glenn and these claims of plagiarism and all the videos and all the talk and the chatter that has resulted because of that. And a claim has been made by a couple of people. Well, there's only been so much. It's only got into such a shitstorm, such a dog pile, because it's Jaclyn Glenn. If it had been a man involved, there wouldn't have been half as much talk. Well, I don't know about that. But what I do know is there wouldn't have been half as much talk about it if it had been Jaclyn Glenn involved. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is these things are entirely unpredictable, because a couple of similar claims, evidence claims, have been made about Jaclyn Glenn before, but nowhere near as much uprising of videos and of talk and of chitter chatter and of condemnation happened on those occasions as happened on these occasions. And although we might be able to look with the benefit of hindsight and say, well, these are the differences, these are the things that have led to it happening on this occasion when it didn't happen on that occasion, it is very difficult to predict from the outset. And I think that these systems are often quite chaotic. It maybe just involves a specific tweet to a specific person that just happens to get read rather than missed. That could make all the difference between these things taking off or otherwise. So that leaves us with the fourth and final of the 4 things that I asked to consider. And I think the most interesting of them, which is this idea that there's an obvious victim but not necessarily an obvious offender or offenders. And if you think of the case of Adria Richards and think back to the time, there was a lot of people who made the case. In fact, I think the person who launched the denial of service attack made the case that this is what he wanted to happen, that she would lose her job because she'd lost somebody else their job, and so she would be getting her just desserts, and probably a lot of people felt that way, that she got what she deserved. And I will hold my hand up now. I'm actually holding both my hands up now. That just shows you how much I'm holding my hand up, that I probably felt exactly the same way. In fact, there's a fair chance that I even went on record at the time and said, well, do you know what, that serves her right. But the more I think about it, the more I withdraw from that position. And the reason is that A, I don't think that she intended that to happen. In fact, she tweeted at a later time that she really didn't want to see that happen at all. That was not the outcome that she wanted. But I also don't think she had any kind of expectation that that would happen. And what we're really talking about is the dog pile, which is a result of the action of thousands and thousands of people all getting involved. And this is the interesting thing. Although when you aggregate the action of all those thousands of people together, it comes out as something which is unpalatable and something which is entirely disproportionate to what was needed, the actions of each individual seems entirely reasonable, taking aside those people who fill their comments, whether on Facebook or Twitter or video, with vitriol and abuse that's unnecessary. To put them to one side, each individual comment is quite reasonable. But you know, in the olden days, if you had some kind of angry mob all there with their pitchforks, if you wanted to join that angry mob, you would see that there was already an angry mob gathered, and you would see how many pitchfork wielding bastards were already out there, and then you could decide whether to join them or think, do you know what, this is getting a little bit out of control. But that's all hidden from us now. We don't really see what's going on now. It's only the person who's on the receiving end who sees the full weight of what is involved. This is especially true on mediums such as Twitter, and also when different online social medias are involved in the same thing. And one of the things which triggered this video that got me thinking about all of this stemmed from Nicole Arbour's fat shaming video, which I'm sure most of you will have stumbled across, because this was the bandwagon to end all bandwagons. Everybody, at least on YouTube, felt they had to chime in on this one. So this woman Nicole Arbour had made this video about fat shaming. I was at work, I was in the gym doing an hour on an exercise bike, and I was watching this video, and so motivated was I, having watched it, to make a response. It's all I could think about for the rest of my hour. So motivated was I that I did something I'd never done before. I can't make a video at work, obviously, that would be very unprofessional, but on the way home I pulled my car in on a quiet country road and I recorded my video and I set it online there and then. Now, as a result of that, it became clear, and quite a few people have mentioned this, that the response, although Nicole Arbour's video was objectionable to quite a large number of people, the level of response was way greater than it really deserved. And whilst I don't really have a great deal of sympathy for Nicole Arbour, partly because that seems to be what she was trying to achieve in the first place, and partly because she got tens of thousands of subscribers as a result of it, it is still an example of this kind of phenomena. And the interesting thing is what motivated me in making my video, or rather what didn't motivate me or didn't occur to me, which was to even consider what the weight of a response would be. All that I was motivated was by my own concerns, which was that I wanted to chime in, which was that I wanted to have my say. So I don't feel any guilt in taking part of that disproportionate response. And I don't think any other single individual that took part of that disproportionate response is guilty either. Another example, which is perhaps even more enlightening, concerns Melody Hensley. I'm sure you will have heard of Melody Hensley, if not for her work for the CFI, and I say work, she is employed. What I mean by that, because I don't actually know how much work is involved at this particular moment in time, she is employed by the CFI, I think in Washington DC, that's the Center for Inquiry, and she is famous for getting PTSD. Now, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is like, effectively it's the modern psychologist's word for what used to be called shell shock. But Melody Hensley didn't get her PTSD fighting in the trenches of Belgium. She got it on Twitter. that you've got to take your hat off to her, because she's kind of a sort of John Rambo-esque figure. Despite getting PTSD on Twitter, she still soldiered on. She was straight back in those trenches of Twitter and has remained there ever since. So hats off. A lot of respect there for Melody Hensley. Now, she had been diagnosed with PTSD as a result, it is claimed, of the amount of abuse, the amount of dogpiling that she had received on Twitter, primarily on Twitter. And as a result of announcing that she'd been diagnosed with PTSD, guess what happens? This is perhaps one example where it wasn't unpredictable. Yeah, you guessed it, she received the mother of all dogpiles, and she was even featured in newspapers in various different countries as the woman that got PTSD off Twitter. In fact, as I tried to search for something on my phone relevant to this particular part of the video, on my phone I put PTSD in my Google search, and one of the top options it gave me as I got to the PTSD part was for Twitter, and that was purely as a result of the Melody Hensley case. Now, the reason that I mention Melody Hensley isn't just so that I can make a few quick cheap jibes at Melody's expense, although that is kind of a little additional bonus there. It is because of something that happened down the line that involved our very own YouTube's very own Richard Coughlan. Now, what had happened is that Coughlan had tried to make a joke. The guy claims he's a comedian, so he tries it on from time to time. But unfortunately, this particular joke which he'd made on Twitter fell flat on its face. It didn't go down very well at all. It was felt by many people to be transphobic, particularly punching down at trans women, and you can judge the joke for yourself. The point of this isn't to judge the joke, it is that the level of response was entirely disproportionate. Perhaps the joke deserved some criticism, but the sheer scale of the response was out of any proportion with what it required. Now, the reason that I mention this is, guess who one of the people who responded to Coughlan was? Go on, guess. Yes, that's right, it was Melody Hensley, and she didn't just respond with one tweet, she responded with a series of tweets. So here's the thing, is that even somebody such as Melody Hensley, who'd had this kind of criticism over a period of time, and it had led to her getting post-traumatic stress disorder. Even Melody Hensley, when she announced she'd got post-traumatic stress disorder, went through the whole thing for a second time and knows what one of these dog piles can feel like. Even she didn't have the self-awareness at that point in time, clearly, to think, hang on a minute, I might be on the other side here. The boot might be on the other foot here, and it might be my foot that the boot happens to be on. Now, I don't say this as criticism of Melody Hensley, because it isn't just Melody Hensley who this applies to. What I'm saying is, if you can go through all these things that Melody Hensley's gone through, and it still doesn't make the slightest fucking bit of difference, can you see why this is an issue of concern to me? And hopefully you can see why I was so motivated to make a video. But you know, of all the videos that I've made since I started on YouTube in 2008, this has to be just about the most unedifying of the lot, because I really do not know what the answer is. In fact, further than that, I'm not even sure what the questions are that we need to be asking to arrive at the answers that we need. That is the problem. And perhaps the simplest option in most of these things, the simplest solution, is usually a solution that doesn't work, but it's just an appeal that we all try and self-police. But in this case, even that, even self-policing, I'm not really sure how that is going to work, because I hope I've demonstrated in the examples I've given, it's not because people are aware of what they're doing but have failed to self-police. It's largely that they're not even aware of the effect that they're having, or that they are involved in a dog pile. They're just seeing their contribution towards it and are not aware of all the other contributions that are taking place. And because of that, I think that people mainly have a free pass in this. Look, all I can do from my perspective is to say, from this point onwards, I am abdicating my free pass. I'm declaring that I'm aware of this, and what I'm going to try and do, I'm sure I'll fail because I'm a flawed human being, but what I'm going to try and do is to limit my responses, whether it's a tweet or whether it's a video, to saying something that either nobody has said before or doesn't seem to be getting a reasonable voice. What I'm not going to do is just to make a response for the sake of it. What I'm not going to do is just to make a response just to add my voice to the 1,000 other people that have said exactly the same thing. What I'd be interested to know from the people, from you watching this video, is do you agree with me that this is a problem? And if you do, is there anything that you think that we could incorporate across social media generally, or in specific aspects of social media, that would stop this thing from happening? What I don't want to see is the kinds of things, the kind of policing measures that clearly people like Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu would like to see, because however much abuse they've got, and some of that abuse is abhorrent, when the claims are made that simple criticism, if it's repeated criticism from somebody, constitutes harassment, that is getting into really dangerous grounds. So how do we keep going with the legitimate criticism but stop this dogpiling from taking place? Well, that's the point that I'm at now. I don't really know what the answer is. I'm interested if anybody has anything to add to that. If you want to make a video response, if you're motivated to do so, then by all means do so. But don't make it a dogpile. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.